In 1990, 5 college students were brutally murdered in Gainesville, Florida by a drifter named Danny Rolling. His crimes later inspired the iconic horror movie Scream. This is the true story behind the Gainesville Ripper, one of America's most disturbing serial killers.
911, what's your emergency?
Settled in north central Florida lies Gainesville, a college town filled with tree-lined streets, bike trails, and the rhythmic hum of student life. But in August of 1990, Gainesville was consumed by terror so brutal, so senseless, that it would etch itself permanently into the psyche of the nation. It was supposed to be the start of something exciting. The University of Florida was welcoming new students, and Gainesville was alive with the optimism of a new semester. Students filled dorms and apartments, unpacking boxes and dreams. But by the end of the first week in August of 1990, 5 students, bright, young, full of potential, would be brutally murdered, and Gainesville would never be the same. On August 24th, 17-year-old freshman Christina Powell and her roommate Sonia Larson hadn't even finished setting up their apartment. They were full of nerves and anticipation for college life. What happened that night was beyond comprehensive. An intruder had slipped into their apartment, waited until they were asleep, and then unleashed a violence so graphic it shocked even seasoned detectives. Sonia was attacked first, bound, raped, and stabbed. Christina was killed next, her body positioned grotesquely, posed by the killer like a macabre display. The walls of the apartment bore no signs of forced entry. He picked the lock. Police feared a sexual predator. They were wrong. This was far worse. Just one day later, the body of 18-year-old Christina Hoyt was found in her small apartment. She hadn't shown up for her night shift at the sheriff's office where she worked as a clerk. Deputies sent to check on her made a discovery so disturbing that many of them had to seek counseling afterward. Christina had been murdered, decapitated, and posed. Her severed head was placed on a shelf, facing her lifeless body, arms draped across the seat of a chair like she was watching herself. Whoever was doing this wasn't just killing. He was putting on a show. And the worst part, he was just getting started. Word spread like wildfire. Police urged students to stay indoors. Parents pulled their kids from the university. Gun sales rocketed. The town was gripped by fear. Girls stopped sleeping alone. People pushed dressers against doors and booby-trapped windows. Gainesville became a ghost town overnight. And then, 2 more victims. On August 27th, Tracy Pauls and her roommate, Manny Taboda, were attacked in their apartment. Manny fought back fiercely, but it wasn't enough. Tracy was raped and murdered, and her body left in the same posed, theatrical fashion as the others. That brought the body count to 5, and still, no one had any idea who the killer was. The killer left almost nothing behind. No fingerprints, no DNA, no solid trace. Police zeroed in on a suspect, a troubled student named Edward Humphrey. He had a violent history and facial scars from a car accident that made him appear even more sinister in the eyes of the public. He was arrested on unrelated charges and held while investigators searched for evidence, but nothing linked him to the murders. Still, the public was relieved. They thought the nightmare was over. Months passed with no new murders. Then, a break, completely by chance. In November 1990, Danny Rolling was arrested in Ocala, Florida after a robbery. While in custody, he began talking to a fellow inmate, bragging and confessing. Rolling wasn't just a thief. He claimed he was the man behind the Gainesville murders. When police searched his campsite in the woods near the University of Florida, they found stolen items, jewelry, clothing, and something even more chilling. Audio recordings where Rollins described his fantasies and his crimes. He sang gospel songs in one breath, and then in the next, calmly described murdering women and posing their bodies. DNA testing would later confirm it. Danny Rolling was the Gainesville Ripper. Born in 1954 in Shreveport, Louisiana, Danny Rolling's life was marred by abuse and violence from the beginning. His father, a police officer, was cruel and often violent toward him and his mother. Rolling spent his early childhood drifting, committing burglaries, peeping into windows, and stalking women. In 1989, before Gainesville, he murdered an entire family in Shreveport. William Grissom, his daughter Julie, and his grandson Sean. Their bodies were mutilated and posed in the same ritualistic way as the Gainesville victims. Danny Rolling was a serial killer long before he made headlines. At his 1994 trial, Danny Rolling surprised everyone. He pled guilty to all 5 murders, no remorse and no emotion. He described how he chose his victims at random, stalking them like prey. He said he was driven by an alternate personality, Gemini, who took control during the killings. It was performative, calculated. He wanted the world to see him as a monster. Danny Rolling was sentenced to death and executed by lethal injection on October 25, 2006. His last words were a song. He sang a gospel hymn as the drugs entered his system. A few years after Rolling's arrest, a young screenwriter named Kevin Williamson saw a documentary about the Gainesville Ripper. The story horrified him, but it also fascinated him. It sparked an idea. What if a serial killer targeted high school students? What if he made phone calls before the murders? What if he wore a mask? That seed of an idea became the script for Scream, a film that would forever redefine the horror genre. While Scream is fictional, its DNA can be traced back to Rolling's crimes. The targeting of young people, the voyeurism, the ritualistic posing, the knife. The real horror behind Scream wasn't a man in a mask. It was Danny Rolling. And he didn't need a costume to be terrifying. Today, few students walking Gainesville campus know the full story of what happened there in the 90s. Some of the apartment buildings still stand, quiet and unassuming. But for the families of the victims, for the investigators who saw the scenes, for the students who lived through the terrifying fall, the memories remain. The Gainesville Ripper may be gone, but his legacy, his brutality, left a scar on Florida that will never fully heal. And the next time you watch Scream, remember, behind the mask, behind the phone calls, behind the blood, there was a real killer. And his name was Danny Rolling. For decades, parents across America have issued the same warning before letting their children tear into Halloween candy. Don't eat anything until we've checked it. A razor in an apple. Drugs in a gummy bear. Poison in a chocolate bar. Most of these stories are urban legends, but in 1974 in Deer Park, Texas, one of these stories was true. And it came from the one place a child should be the safest, their own father. On October 31st, 1974, a chilly Thursday evening, the streets of Deer Park, Texas, just outside of Houston, was alive with ghosts and goblins, tiny princesses and cowboys laughing under streetlights, clenching pillowcases, and plastic pumpkins overflowing with candy. Ronald Clark O'Brien was a 30-year-old optician, father of 2, and a deacon at his local church. He was out trick-or-treating with his 8-year-old son Timothy and 5-year-old daughter Elizabeth. A family friend and his 2 children joined them. It was supposed to be a safe suburban Halloween. Friendly faces, familiar houses, and fun memories. But sometime between knocking on doors and filling their bags, Ronald O'Brien handed out something different. 5 21-inch long pixie sticks filled with a bitter white powder. He would later claim that he got them from a dark house where the lights were off and someone cracked the door open just long enough to hand them out. No one else saw it. Hours later, back at home, Timothy begged to eat just one piece of candy before bed. His father agreed and offered the pixie stick. Timothy had trouble getting the powder out of the straw-like tube, so his dad helped him shake it loose. The boy complained that it tasted bitter. Moments later, he was vomiting violently, then convulsing. Within an hour, Timothy O'Brien was dead. As news spread, panic erupted across the Houston area. Parents flooded emergency rooms, bringing in every piece of their children's Halloween haul. Police worked through the night trying to identify the source of the poisoned pixie sticks. One mother told investigators her son almost ate a similar candy but couldn't open the staple that sealed the top shut. It was one of the same pixie sticks Ronald O'Brien handed out. A staple sealing it shut. That wasn't standard packaging. Authorities quickly realized the unthinkable. Someone was trying to poison random children on Halloween. The media seized on the story. The Candyman was born. But something wasn't adding up. Investigators retraced the trick-or-treating route. The dark house O'Brien claimed handed out the candy. The owner was a man named Courtney Melvin, a local air traffic controller who didn't get home until nearly 11 p.m. that night. Over 200 people confirmed he'd been at work. Police grew suspicious. Ronald Clark O'Brien was the only adult who claimed to receive the tainted pixie sticks. And he only gave them to children at his party, including his own son. Why would a stranger give him 5 poisoned candies through a cracked door? And then investigators dug deeper and uncovered a motive that would shock the nation. Ronald O'Brien was drowning in debt, over $100,000, equivalent to $500,000 today. He'd recently been fired from a job after poor work ethic and suspected theft. He was on the verge of losing his car and his house and had defaulted on several loans. But just a few months before Halloween, Ronald did something chilling. He took out life insurance policies on his children. $10,000 each at first, then another $20,000, then yet another $20,000. He never told his wife. And the day after Timothy died, just hours later, Ronald called the insurance company to inquire about collecting the policy. Police found that Ronald had recently asked a chemical supply company how to obtain cyanide, the same poison that killed Timothy. A chemist testified he asked about lethal doses and where he could buy it. Witnesses at a local college remember him asking students about poisons. The pixie sticks were tested. Each contained enough potassium cyanide to kill 3 to 4 adults. The top was carefully opened, filled with powder, and stapled shut. The truth was horrifying. O'Brien planned to murder his own children and make it look like a random Halloween tragedy. To avoid suspicion, he handed out 4 other poisoned candies. If more kids died, it would look like work of a stranger. But none of those children ate the pixie sticks. Only Timothy. In June 1975, Ronald Clark O'Brien was arrested and charged with capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder. The trial was swift and disturbing. Prosecutors painted a picture of a man so consumed by debt and greed, he was willing to use his own son as a pawn in a cruel plan. His wife, devastated and blindsided, testified against him. She had no idea about the insurance policies. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Ronald O'Brien was found guilty and sentenced to death. On death row, he became known as the Candyman. Other inmates reportedly hated him so much they refused to talk to him. Even hardened criminals were disgusted. After nearly a decade of appeals, Ronald Clark O'Brien was executed by lethal injection on March 31st, 1984. Outside the prison, a crowd gathered. Some shouted "trick or treat," others threw candy at protesters. The death of Timothy O'Brien sent shockwaves through America. The idea that a parent, a figure of love and protection, could intentionally poison their own child disguised as a Halloween treat was almost too horrific to comprehend. It changed Halloween forever. From that moment on, Halloween candy checks became a parental ritual. Neighborhoods organized safer trick-or-treat events. Schools started hosting trunk-or-treat parties. Warnings of razor blades and apples and tainted treats flooded local news every October. To this day, there has never been a verified case of a stranger poisoning Halloween candy. But Ronald O'Brien made the myth feel real. One act of evil transformed into a cautionary tale. The monster wasn't lurking in the shadow. He wasn't a masked killer or a deranged neighbor. He was a father holding his son's hand, helping him open a pixie sticks, and watching him die. Halloween is supposed to be fun, with candy, costumes, and laughter in the dark. But every time a parent checks a Snicker bar or tear open a wrapper just to be sure, somewhere in the back of their mind, they're thinking of Ronald O'Brien, the man who made the myth real, the real Candyman. In the city known as Dnipropetrovsk, a city scarred by the collapse of the Soviet Union, once a hub for science and rocket engineering, now rusting under economic decline. But in the summer of 2007, it wasn't the factories or crime rates that made headlines. It wasn't economics or politics that would stain the city's name forever. It was the actions of two teenage boys and a rusty, yellow-handled hammer. This is the horrifying true story of the Dnipropetrovsk maniacs, a pair of killers whose crimes were so brutal, they left even hardened detectives and seasoned forensics experts shaken, and whose footage would later leak, earning them a dark and infamous title online: 3 Guys, 1 Hammer. Viktor Syenko and Igor Sipronyek were only 19 years old. To their classmates, they were quiet and strange. They didn't drink, they didn't party. They were inseparable, and they had a hobby, one that no one understood until it was too late: animal torture. Reports would later reveal disturbing details: cats nailed to trees, dogs dismembered in basements, a fascination with death, control and silence. A former classmate recalled seeing one of them smiling, holding up a kitten's corpse, and no one said anything. They thought it was just a phase. They were wrong. It began on June 25th, 2007. A woman out for a walk was found in a wooded area. Her face unrecognizable, skull shattered. A hammer was found nearby, caked in dry blood. There was no motive, no robbery, nothing missing, just rage. 2 days later, another body, a man mid-40s, found on a beach, killed the same way. Within weeks, the city of Dnipropetrovsk was in a state of panic. In just over a month, 21 victims were brutally murdered. Men, women, children. The youngest, just 14. The oldest, 48. Many of them were struck repeatedly in the face and head, hammer blows delivered with terrifying speed and force. Some were stabbed, some mutilated. And in nearly all the cases, nothing was taken. The victims weren't targeting for money or revenge. They were picked at random for sport, and the killers were filming it. In July of 2007, a video was leaked online. 3 guys, 1 hammer. But only 2 were present. The video, warning, once seen is never forgotten, shows the final moments of a man named Sergei Yatsenko. He had survived cancer. He was a father. He was riding his bike when he went missing. What the video shows is beyond disturbing. He lies on the ground, helpless. Multiple blows to the head with a hammer. One boy drives a hammer into his skull. The other punctures his eye with a screwdriver. They laugh. They mock. They smile for the camera. All while their victim gurgles and twitches in pain. The video is real, authentic, unflinching. Even seasoned investigators broke down when they saw it. The killers, they kept this and other videos on a memory card like trophies. Their downfall came by accident. One of the boys tried to sell a stolen phone belonging to one of the victims. That was all it took. Authorities matched the SIM to a murder victim and traced the location. They arrested Victor and Igor in their homes. What police found was chilling. A hidden folder on a computer labeled "The Best Murders." Photos of them posing with bodies. Photos with them attending their victims' funerals along with giving the tombstones the middle finger. A list of possible targets. And footage. They wanted to be famous. They wanted to be remembered. They called it a game. One that only ended when they were caught. During the trial, they showed no remorse. In court, they sat emotionless like statues. They grinned as victims' families sobbed in the gallery. Igor and Victor were both sentenced to life in prison. A third accomplice, Alexander Ganja, was convicted for unrelated robberies but received a shorter sentence. To this day, neither Igor nor Victor has apologized. The Neproprovok maniacs are a case unlike any other. 2 teenage boys from decent homes who chose to become monsters. They didn't kill out of desperation or delusion or rage. They killed because they could. And they filmed it so they could watch it again. To this day, the video 3 Guys, 1 Hammer is passed around in the darkest corners of the internet. I won't describe more than I already have because some things, once seen, can never be unseen. Be careful what you watch. Some evil never leaves your mind.